West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
An appeals court yesterday rejected failed Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake's lawsuit challenging her election loss. A 3-judge panel upheld a lower court's ruling that said Lake did not provide enough evidence to support her claims that the election results were tainted by illegal votes and misconduct by election officials. The chief judge wrote in part that the evidence ultimately supports the court's conclusion that voters were able to cast their ballots, that votes were counted correctly, and that no other basis justifies setting aside the election results. This ruling comes as Lake's lawyers are facing bar complaints over their work with the former candidate. The lawyers have already been sanctioned by a federal judge over an election-related lawsuit. Where are these lawyers coming from, Joe, that Trump is getting and Kari Lake? Who are these people? Who are these people? Where do they get them, like off the side of the road?
Who are these men? Who are these men? She asked from the witness stand in the verdict. And women. But you know, Elise, we can actually just step back for a second here and look at all the times we asked, are some people just above the law? Can lawyers just go in front of courts and lie? Like, is there no recourse? Is there no justice? We are finding now, time and time again. I mean, let's just look at the top 2 stories this morning. A grand jury found what was found time and time again by Republican-appointed judges in Georgia, by a Republican governor in Georgia, by a Republican secretary of state in Georgia, by Republican elected officials in Georgia. And we just had a 3-judge panel in Arizona find what Republicans in Maricopa County have founded, Republican-appointed judges have founded, Republican officials founded time and time again, that there was no election fraud. And not only are these people facing justice in court, and Donald Trump may face the ultimate justice in court with a coming indictment in Georgia, but even their lawyers are being held accountable for going in front of judges and just lying. This is something, I guess as a lawyer, it's kind of strange. As a politician, I understand everything's on the table. You've got to swat everything away. But the lawyer in me has always been deeply offended by the arguments that these people have made in front of judges. And I asked myself from the very beginning, how can Rudy Giuliani get away with that? How can these other lawyers get away with it? I would have been disbarred the first day if I had tried to do something. Chuck would have been disbarred as a lawyer if he had tried doing something. How are these people getting away with this? And we're finding out as time goes on, Elise, they're not getting away with this.
Well, I think of the ordinary citizen who's petrified of a traffic ticket, Joe, and they don't get away with it. And it seemed like all of these lawyers and former government officials have just gotten away with so much. It does look like in Georgia, Republican officials held the line well, and I think that's going to reflect well for their political fortunes down the road, potentially, especially looking at Governor Brian Kemp. But you have all of these top officials like Donald Trump. Is he ever going to face consequences? I still don't. Giuliani,
okay, so I understand this feeling. Yeah.
Everyone else is facing consequences.
People are in jail.
Level.
People are in jail.
The
people
Proud
are charged
Boys,
with seditious conspiracy.
They face consequences, but when will Donald Trump actually face consequences?
That's my question for Professor Eddie Glaude. Is it good that these people keep coming back to the trough and trying to find some sort of infraction against them, some sort of election conspiracy, and judges keep saying no, or is it good because judges keep saying no, or is it bad that they keep coming back? They keep coming back to Kari Lake, Donald Trump. When will they ever go away and realize they lost and probably broke the law?
Well, it's a good thing, Mika, that judges are saying no. It's a bad thing, though, that they keep coming back because it erodes the trust in the democratic process. Part of what Joe and we've been talking about is that Americans have been awash in lies, and those lies have in some ways affected our ability to engage in reasoned deliberation, to do the work that Madisonian democracy requires of us. And with Donald Trump tweeting out that the special grand jury's report is a clear exoneration of him. That's just Fat Elvis running the Bill Barr move with regards to Mueller, right? So we know that these people are constantly trying to angle their way to pursue power and to protect themselves. But the ongoing effect, though, is in some ways, the erosion of the foundation of our democratic process. So it's dangerous, Mika. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
So Chuck Rosenberg, obviously, Georgia is just one of many places where Donald Trump faces legal peril. To Elisa's point, we don't know whether he actually will have to face the music. He might. He hasn't yet. But as you look at where these threats remain, that's Georgia, that's the special counsel January 6th, that's, of course, the Mar-a-Lago documents, that's cases in New York, D.C., just about everywhere, it seems. Where do you assess these places in terms of where he faces the greatest legal risk? And with the idea that, of course, for any case that involves someone as high profile as Donald Trump, it would seem to be prosecutors would only bring a charge if they're really confident they can get a conviction.
Yeah, Jonathan. So let me take your second point first, because it's an incredibly important one. As a federal prosecutor, our standards, our guidelines require that we have a reasonable probability of conviction before we charge somebody. So a hunch doesn't cut it. My personal belief, Jonathan, that you committed a crime isn't enough. To Eddie's point, we need this pesky thing called evidence. And the courts of the United States are where evidence matters. So, you can say things that aren't true on television. You can say things that aren't true on the well of the House floor. But in court, it matters. And so prosecutors need evidence. We only see a small portion of what prosecutors in Manhattan may have, or in Fulton County may have, or in Jack Smith's federal investigation, what they may have. And so it's really hard for us to judge the totality of the case against perhaps Donald Trump and others. But evidence matters in court. And Joe was talking about this earlier, right? If you show up without evidence, you lose. You may not lose in politics, but you lose in court. And if you think back to the 60 or so cases that the Trump folks brought challenging the election after November 2020, they lost every single one of them. And the reason they lost every single one of them is they didn't have evidence. It's not that complex. So, Jonathan, I don't know which case poses the greatest existential threat to Mr. Trump, because I haven't seen all of the evidence. But good prosecutors and good agents are working assiduously on these cases. And if they bring charges, it's because they believe they have a reasonable probability of conviction, our standard. Because if you do bring charges, and this isn't just true for Mr. Trump, it's true for anybody, you want to bring charges that are going to hold up in court because they're evidence-based. And that's what we ought to be looking for and waiting for and watching for.
It is Friday, the 17th of February of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the Diner of Life. Well, we've made it to the weekend, and that means that we have a weekend ahead of us. And if memory serves correctly, I believe we have a holiday on Monday, too. All President's Day. Just let's combine Washington and Lincoln and call it All President's Day. Okay. I remember the good old days when we were able to celebrate those two holidays independently of each other. We were mere kids in school, and any kind of holiday that kept you out of school was a good day. In a way. Actually, I loved going to school. I hated missing school. That's why we studied so much at home, too. Just bring school home with us. We were homeschooled. You've heard this story before. We were homeschooled every day that we came home from school. There was more waiting for us. All right. So, I got that little tidbit of history out of the way again. Yes. So, looks like old Donnie Trump thinks that he's been exonerated because his name was redacted out of the grand jury report, not realizing that means he's the target. Okay. Alrighty. And that's, he's, I guess maybe a lawyer told him that. I don't think it's the parking lot lawyer anymore. Is she still part of the group? I don't know. But his lawyering seems to be lacking. Yeah, seems to be. And I thought Trusty was supposed to be involved in this somewhere, but you never hear about him anymore. You know why? Because he's not doing what Donnie wants. He's doing what he thinks might be the best strategy to get this stupid oaf off again. Well, I don't know. Will he be held accountable? It's going to be hard. Gonna be hard. But do you think for a moment, just one little nanosecond, that if Hillary had actually done something a fraction of what Trump did, she'd be in jail? They would not have hesitated. And when I say they, I mean the Department of Justice. Okay. It will look like we're trying to go after our political enemies. Well, you know what? Nazis are enemies, political and otherwise. So go after them. That's what you're there for. Jeez. Is that a political act? I think crimes have been committed. And now we're finding out that Santos and Luna are not alone in this new crop of Republican electeds who have somehow padded their resume, and they, meaning us, cannot quite figure out where the hell these people came from. I have some ideas. I do. And you know what they are? It starts with V and ends with lad. Yep. There's a lot of offices in the FSB. And the Kremlin itself it's quite a large structure. There's a lot of training facilities within the confines of that architectural wonder. There is. And I just wonder sometimes, because at least with old George DeVolder Santos, whatever this guy's name is, we don't know. We do know that he has been getting some Russian oligarch money, which means nothing happens without Vlad's approval. Oh, as an aside, did you see that some woman general or somebody involved in some part of the Russian military died by somehow falling out of a 5-story window? That happens a lot. In fact, so much so we call it a convenient falling from a 5-story window. Yeah, she probably didn't live in the place that she was at. had no real connection to it. We've heard all sorts of excuses. Oh, that person fell from a 5-story window because they were helping somebody move a piano. Really? Yeah. Just walking along, seeing they needed some help up 5 stories, so he went up there and helped and somehow fell. Yeah. Okay. Well, back to our electeds. I think, I wouldn't put it past old Vlad. He's already had help from the Republican Party already to pretty much overthrow the United States of America. The Republicans think they're not really overthrowing it. They're saving it. If you have to storm the Capitol armed, beat the crap out of cops in a violent overthrow of the United States of America, you are not saving it. You are destroying it. Didn't get their way. And this insurgency continues as we speak. Once again, an insurrection becomes an insurgency when electeds who were part of the insurrection begin to legislate to change the laws so that the insurrection continues from within, therefore an insurgency. That's where we are. We have like Marjorie Taylor Greene on a committee whining about the constitutional rights of the insurrectionists, the rioters. They're being violated. Still going on with this lie that it was just a peaceful protest. Bringing back the old idea that it wasn't really us that did that, it was Antifa. Crisis actors. So if that's not active Russian measures, I don't know what is. Disrupt the actual meaning of meaning. I don't know what anything means anymore. There's just so many opinions about it. I can't figure it out. Thousands and thousands of years to be able to develop our minds so that we can evolve to get to the stars and beyond. And look at us. Okay. Can't end world hunger. Can't get past greed and ego. All right. I guess we're not going to the stars of our own volition. We'll be getting there anyway. Don't you worry. Okay. Well, how's that for metaphysics on a Friday? Give me a drink. Get me that French 77. Get it over here now. Okay. We don't drink this early in the morning, but virtually it's okay because, it's what is time? What is time? I'll tell you what time it is. It's time to tell you what we have curated for you here as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, long a hotbed of extremism, Oregon seeks to curb paramilitaries. Well, it's about time. And there'll be a big fight about it because apparently the paramilitaries have a constitutional right to pretty much disrupt anything they want to disrupt. And they'll tell you that you better believe it or else. Department of Justice officials in Washington removed federal prosecutors in Texas and have taken over the corruption investigation into Attorney General Ken Paxton. And it couldn't have happened any time too soon. Took them a while. And South Carolina lawmakers are alarmed at what they are finding in the probe of a $3.5 billion accounting error. Oops. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Facebook ran ads in Moldova for an oligarch sanctioned by the United States, and China imposed sanctions on Lockheed Martin and Raytheon for supplying weapons to Taiwan. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across from that chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does help. And we have bills to pay. Oh, do we ever. And this time of year is when they hit you big time, too. So if you could afford to maybe send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, we're able to pool those with like-minded patronages, and it helps us pay our bills. So thank you very much for your generosity, and thank you to those of you who may consider being so generous in the future. And also, thank you to those of you who are recent Patreons of Netroots Radio. Thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime, and that's on Daily Kos, of course, because it's a diary, and that's where you can find the actual articles in which we are deriving whatever it is that we do here. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. They are everywhere. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Andrew Zelsky. An armed takeover of a federal wildlife refuge, over 100 straight days of racial justice protests that turned downtown Portland into a battleground, a violent breach of the state capitol, clashes between gun-toting right-wingers and leftist militants. Over the past decade, Oregon experienced the sixth highest number of extremist incidents in the nation, despite being 27th in population, according to an Oregon Secretary of State report. Now, the state legislature is considering a bill that experts say would create the nation's most comprehensive law against paramilitary activity. It would provide citizens and the state attorney general with civil remedies in court if armed members of a private military group interfere with or intimidate another person who is engaging in an activity they have a legal right to do, such as voting. A court could block paramilitary members from pursuing an activity if the state attorney general believed it would be illegal conduct. All 50 states prohibit private paramilitary organizations and or paramilitary activity, but no other law creates civil remedies, said Mary McCord, an expert on terrorism and domestic extremism who helped craft the bill. The Oregon bill is also unique because it would allow people injured by private, unauthorized paramilitary activity to sue, she said. Opponents say such a law would infringe on rights to freely associate and to bear arms. I like that. And tiki torches, too. Let's assemble with tiki torches, our guns, and we'll call it, freely associating. The bill's sponsor, Representative Darcia Graber, a Democrat from suburban Portland, said the proposed reforms would make it harder for private militaries to operate with impunity throughout Oregon, regardless of their ideology. But dozens of conservative Oregonians in written testimony have expressed suspicion that the Democrat-controlled legislature aims to pass a bill restricting their right to assemble, and legislation would target right-wing armed groups like the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer, but not black-clad anarchists who have vandalized downtown Portland and battled police. This bill would clearly put restrictions on who could gather in a group and for what reasons they chose to, said Matthew Holman, a resident of Coos Bay, a town on Oregon's southwest coast. The pioneering measures raise a host of issues which lawmakers tried to parse in a House Judiciary Committee hearing last week. If residents are afraid to go to a park with their children while an armed militia group is present, could they later sue the group? What constitutes a paramilitary group? What is defined as being armed? Oregon Department of Justice Attorney Carson Whitehead said the proposed law would not sanction a person for openly carrying firearms, which is constitutionally permissible. But if a paramilitary group went to a park knowing their presence would be intimidating, anyone afraid of also going to the park could sue for damages, Whitehead said, and that makes sense. If you're using terror to alter people's behavior because you're doing it for a political end, that's not constitutionally guaranteed. A paramilitary group could range from ones that wear uniforms and insignia like the Three Percenters to a handful of people who act in a coordinated way with command structure to engage in violence. And Representative Rick Lewis, a Republican from Silverton, asked pointedly during the committee hearing whether rocks and frozen water bottles, which Portland police said had been thrown at them during demonstrations in 2021, would fall under the proposed law. Well, a frozen water bottle and rocks could cause serious injury or death, so they would be considered dangerous weapons under the Oregon law, responded Kimberly McCullough, Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum's legislative director. Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt, whose jurisdiction encompasses Portland, testified in favor of the bill, expressing frustration that police often cannot single out violent actors lurking among peaceful protesters. Our current inability to get upstream of this violence before it starts leaves us vulnerable to organized criminal elements who enter into a protest environment with the express intention of escalating the situation into an assault or arson or a riot. Now, I hope they don't mean that that's Antifa doing that, because that is actually the tactics of the Boogaloo Boys, who killed cops in Oakland and Santa Cruz and then tried to blame it on Antifa. Why? To escalate the tensions. McCord said the measure would mark a milestone in the United States where the FBI is warned of a rapidly growing threat of homegrown violent extremism. This bill is amended, would be the most comprehensive statute to address unauthorized paramilitary activity that threatens civil rights, she said. The tactic of enabling private residents to file lawsuits against paramilitary groups may be a novel one, but it has been used in other arenas. Environmental groups, for example, can sue businesses accused of violating federal pollution limits. In Texas, a 2021 law authorizes lawsuits against anyone who performs or aids in an abortion. And in Missouri, a law allows citizens to sue local law enforcement officers who enforce federal gun laws. But the Oregon bill differs from those laws because only people who are injured by unlawful paramilitary activity could sue, McCord said. The Oregon bill also opens a path for government enforcement mechanisms, since it allows the state attorney general to seek a court injunction to prevent planned paramilitary activity. Weiberg and Eric Tucker of the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Justice Department officials in Washington have taken over the corruption investigation into Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, removing the case from the hands of federal prosecutors in Texas who'd long been leading the probe. The move was disclosed in a statement by state prosecutors handling their own case against Paxton. Is the latest development in the federal investigation into the Attorney General, who came under FBI scrutiny in 2020 after his own top deputies accused him of bribery and abusing his office to help one of his campaign contributors, who also employed a woman with whom Paxton acknowledged having had an extramarital affair. The investigation of the three-term Republican is now being led by the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section, which prosecutes allegations of official misconduct against local elected leaders at the local, state, and federal level. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Texas was recently recused from the complex case after working on it for years. An abrupt change that came within days of Paxton agreeing to apologize and pay $3.3 million in taxpayer money to 4 of the former staffers who reported him to the FBI. State prosecutors working on a separate securities fraud case against Paxton, Brian Weiss and Kent Schaefer, said in a statement to the Associated Press that they were notified of the move. They referred all questions to the Justice Department, which declined to comment. It's not known whether Paxton will face charges, although federal investigators in Texas would work the case, believe there was sufficient evidence for an indictment, and it was not immediately clear what prompted top Justice Department officials to recuse the federal prosecutors in West Texas, but the move was pushed for by Paxton's attorneys. One of his defense lawyers, Dan Codgel, said on Thursday yesterday that he'd previously appealed to agency officials to take the case out of the hands of the local U.S. Attorney's Office, which he said had an obvious conflict because of the overlapping allegations and investigations that led to the probe of Paxton. 8 of Paxton's senior staff accused him of crimes in 2020 after the Attorney General hired an outside lawyer to look into an Austin real estate developer's claims of wrongdoing by FBI agents and federal prosecutors who were separately investigating the developer. Those agents and lawyers are part of the same federal prosecutorial district as the ones who came to investigate Paxton. It was the right thing to do, said Codgel. He said federal officials had not informed him of the move and declined to comment further. The overlap was known to officials within the Justice Department and publicly reported on by the AP within weeks of Paxton's staff going to the FBI. Nonetheless, the agency left the investigation to be led by a career federal prosecutor based in San Antonio, who was previously best known for winning a money laundering and fraud case against a Democratic state senator. Of the AP brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Throughout several hours of sworn testimony before lawmakers tasked with investigating a $3.5 billion accounting error, South Carolina's chief fiscal watchdog struggled to delineate a clear timeline about an admittedly complex mapping problem that plagued the office for at least a decade. The chair of the Senate Finance Subcommittee probing the issue said he lost confidence in South Carolina Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom's ability to accurately answer questions about the state's overstated cash balance, first publicly shared on February 9th. I noted many contradictions throughout today's testimony, Republican Senator Larry Groom said. A $3.5 billion error is no small error, and to treat it as such does a disservice to the people of our state, who have to have confidence in their elected officials. Grooms expressed concern that the office failed its primary duty of producing an accurate annual financial report from at least 2017 to 2022 under Ekstrom, who was reelected this fall to the position he has now held for 2 decades. A $12 million coding error in 2007 got compounded by a shift beginning in 2011 from one accounting system to another, Ekstrom said. The reporting confusion then led to a double counting of state cash transferred to colleges and universities. By 2017, the sum of overstated funds had grown to $1.3 billion. That number has nearly tripled in the following years as South Carolina sent more and more money to higher education. Ekstrom emphasized that the state's financial position remains strong. He said the reporting omissions did not impact South Carolina's actual available cash or the General Assembly's budgeting process. While budget writers do not rely on the Comptroller General's annual comprehensive financial report, bond rating agencies do consult it. Ekstrom said the state's tremendously high cash balances and diverse economy reflect an ability to weather terrible downturns that should instill confidence in bond rating agencies. Subcommittee members were not convinced. Democratic Senator Thomas McCleaven expressed concern that the error may impact the state's credit score going forward. Our cash position has been misrepresented, McCleaven said. Creditors, bondholders don't like things like that. Lawmakers seeking to pin down when the office knew of the reporting error and its scope left the meeting with many questions. While an outside auditor had informed the Office of Reporting Issues in 2017, according to Ekstrom, he thought the matter had been resolved. Its full sweep did not become clear until last year. That's when Catherine Kipp, an accountant who joined the Comptroller General's office 3 years ago, after 5 years with the State Treasurer's office, solved the problem. Ekstrom testified that he first learned the problem had persisted in the early summer of 2022, but did not know the error amounted to $3.5 billion until very late into the year. By the end of October, he said at one point, the Comptroller's General Office had finished its initial review. Kipp testified that she finished unearthing the blunder in the first week of November. Later that month, she said another round of outside auditors had finished reviewing her account. On December 7th of 2022, Ekstrom said he shared the details with 2 members of the governor's staff. Lawmakers questioned why Ekstrom waited to inform any outside officials of the error. Ekstrom said his office did not want to share details until the very thorough Kipp had finished confirming the extent of the omission. Well. And that brings us to our break. Yes, our break. And why don't we do that? So we will go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Twistin' the Night Away. Director-writer M. Night Shyamalan has had a career of twists and turns both in general and for me personally. His first two big films, The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, were notable for having surprising twists at their ends. Well, not so much twists as big reveals. But then Shyamalan made his smartest twist. He stopped writing reveals. Because seriously, who can keep that up? Especially with people now intently looking for the twist. Turns out what people like less than a weak twist is you not doing one at all, and I guess cheating them of the chance to figure you out and feel superior, whatever. People were upset. There was so much knee-jerk anti-Shyamalan fervor, I was surprised he kept getting greenlit. Meanwhile, I still loved his films. But then came another twist. Having made thrillers like a scion of Hitchcock and De Palma, Shyamalan nudged his work over into horror. And I don't like horror. I just don't. So I lost one of my favorite filmmakers. So, now here's Knock at the Cabin, my first Shyamalan film in years, and it has so many of the qualities that I loved in his earlier works. It's nicely written, it's solidly paced, he crafts scenes of emotional intimacy extremely well, along with capturing really great earnest performances from his actors, a killer 1-2 punch of skills. And yet, the movie uses a lot of the structure and filmic language of horror. I mean, for all that Knock at the Cabin examines the thin line between empathy and self-sacrifice, a line I didn't know existed, it remains, at its core, a home invasion thriller in what I call the ritual killing genre. We meet some people, get to know them, and then watch them die. Slasher films, torture porn, disaster movies, why do we make films like these? Why do we watch them? If you like them, great. Go see Knock at the Cabin. Dave Bautista's casting is inspired. I'll be rewatching Lady in the Water. And yes, I know you hated that one. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. When you look up at the Milky Way, you're gazing at the galactic equivalent of Rome, a metropolis of stars with layers upon layers of history, just like the Eternal City. So says the astronomer Hans Walter Rix.
There were glory days, there were disasters, and all of these things kind of happen in the life of galaxies. And the Milky Way is just one galaxy. We can look at star by star. And so you can kind of see individual episodes in actual detail.
Now Rix and a colleague at the Max Planck Institute for Astronomy in Germany have indeed gone star by star, determining the ages of nearly 250,000 stars in the Milky Way. That work has allowed them to reconstruct some of the major life events in the galaxy's evolution over its 13 billion years of existence.
What it showed is that indeed the youth and childhood of the Milky Way was turbulent, but actually afterwards we've lived an enormously sheltered life compared to most other galaxies. Gas drizzled in, and the suburbs grew peacefully and sprawled.
The astronomers say that the galaxy's thick disk began to form around 13 billion years ago, just 800 million years after the Big Bang. Then, around 11 billion years ago, a cataclysmic collision occurred. The Gaia Enceladus satellite galaxy crashed into the Milky Way.
And just at the same time, there was a huge burst of star formation, or a large increase of star formation in our own Milky Way. And that suggests, doesn't prove, that the perturbance that this infalling satellite created caused a lot of the gas that was in our Milky Way to form stars.
The details are in the journal Nature. Now, none of this is a total surprise. People have simulated the Milky Way's formation before.
So I would say really what our work has done is it just shows it clearly. A long suspected picture is coming into focus.
In other words, this work lays out a more definitive playbill of the acts in this galactic drama. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work. Sorry, I'm late. Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
When you learned about the killing of Tyre Nichols, were you appalled? And I have a follow-up question.
I'm Lily Ledbetter, and this is a Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
And the follow-up question is, were you surprised? Tyre Nichols died at the hands of members of the Scorpion unit of the Memphis Police Department. Scorpion, disbanded by the Memphis police chief after Tyre Nichols was killed, was formed in November 2021, a specialized squad of some 40 officers mandated to bring down violent crime. There now are many credible reports that Scorpion was operating on its own terms, with residents testifying to Scorpion's repeated acts of physical intimidation and harassment. Young black men were targeted. The city is 65% black, yet according to the police department's own data, 90% of the people arrested by Scorpion were black. And black residents in Memphis were 3 times more likely than whites to be subjected to physical force by the police. 3 times as likely. This data predating the creation of Scorpion. Indeed, it goes back 7 years. A Scorpion tactic. Drive up to people on the street, jump out of the cruiser or unmarked car, and engage in the vehicular equivalent of stop and frisk. It is not clear how many Scorpion members operated with these tactics, but clearly some did. Which raises, yet again, the perennial question, who will police the police?
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. That was the day that working people in the United States said goodbye to one of their great heroes. Florence Kelley was born in 1859. Her father, William D. Kelley, was a U.S. Senator. Senator Kelley was an abolitionist and was concerned about the conditions under which working people toiled. He passed that concern on to his daughter. Florence enjoyed the finest education, studying at Cornell University, the University of Zurich, and the Union College of Law. She became a vocal opponent of child labor and sweatshop conditions. She found camaraderie with like-minded women, including Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr at Hull House in Chicago. Kelley soon became an important addition to the work of this famed settlement house. Jane Addams' nephew remembered her as the finest rough-and-tumble fighter for the good life of others that Hull House ever knew. She began to visit local factories around Hull House to document unsafe working conditions and the use of child labor. Based on her careful research, the Illinois legislature passed a law banning children under the age of 14 from working in factories. Florence was named the first ever chief factory inspector in the state of Illinois. From Chicago, she moved on to New York, where she helped to found the National Consumer League. The league supported the fight for the 8-hour workday and was a leader in the fight against sweatshops. Florence was also a founding member of the NAACP. She helped to found the National Child Labor Committee, a group dedicated to ending child labor. In response to their work, in 1912, the U.S. Children's Bureau became part of the federal government. It was the only federal agency at the time run by women. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, because there's lots more of us where we come from, where it is currently 23 degrees Fahrenheit under icy fog conditions, expecting a high, though a bit warmer than yesterday. They're saying that we're going to be in the mid-50s. We'll see if that actually pans out. Partly cloudy throughout the day, winds light and variable. A few clouds overnight with lows in the mid to upper 20s, winds light and variable, and then partly to mostly cloudy tomorrow. Highs again expected to be in the mid 50s, winds light and variable. And then beginning on Monday, it looks like we are expecting a week of rainy, snowy mix and a snowy, rainy mix. Sometimes with only snow, sometimes with only rain. For the whole week, we'll see how that pans out too. Looks like pollen is still rated as none here in the little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 49 parts per million, though it's bumping up into that moderate range. And it looks like the daytime UV index is in the moderate range at level 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.3 inches. Visibility is at a half mile, and relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. That little weather station in that little town of London is registering 58 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 60 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 56 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 34 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 41 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 64 and fair. Tokyo is 41 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees and partly cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy, and also with a small craft advisory. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. David Klepper and Stephen McGrath of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Facebook allowed an exiled Moldovan oligarch with ties to the Kremlin to run ads calling for protests and uprisings against the pro-Western government, even though he and his political party were on U.S. sanction lists. The ads, featuring politician and convicted fraudster Elon Shore, were ultimately removed by Facebook, but not before they were seen millions of times in Moldova, a small nation of about 2.6 million, sandwiched between Romania and war-torn Ukraine. Seeking to exploit anger over inflation and rising fuel prices, the paid posts from Shore's political party targeted the government of pro-Western President Maya Sandu, who earlier this week detailed what she said was a Russian plot to topple her government using external saboteurs. Destabilization attempts are a reality, and for our institutions, they represent a real challenge, Sandu said yesterday, Thursday, as she swore in a new government led by pro-Western Prime Minister Doran Racine, her former defense and security advisor. We need decisive steps to strengthen the security of the country. The ads reveal how Russia and its allies have exploited lapses by social media platforms like Facebook, many of them operated by U.S. companies, to spread propaganda and disinformation that weaponizes economic and social insecurity in an attempt to undermine governments in Eastern Europe. Sounds like it's being done here, too, but that's in this reporter's opinion. Shore's ads have helped fuel angry protests against the government and appear to be aimed at destabilizing Moldova and returning it to Russia's sphere of influence. Even though he is on the U.S. sanction list, I still see sponsored ads on Facebook, according to Dorian Frazanou, a foreign policy advisor to former Moldovan Prime Minister Natalia Graverlida, saying he had spotted what he believes were fake accounts sharing the post this week. He said the Moldovan government sought answers from Facebook to no avail. We have talked with Facebook, he said, but it is very hard because there's no specific person, no contact.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Joe McDonald of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. China imposed trade and investment sanctions yesterday, Thursday, on Lockheed Martin and a unit of Raytheon for supplying weapons to Taiwan, stepping up efforts to isolate the island democracy claimed by the ruling Communist Party as part of its territory. Lockheed Martin Corp. and Raytheon Technologies Corp.'s Raytheon Missiles and Defense are barred from importing goods into China or making new investments in the country, the Ministry of Commerce announced. It said they were added to the unreliable entity list of companies whose activities are restricted because they might endanger national sovereignty, security, or development interests. It wasn't clear what impact the penalties might have. The United States bars most sales of weapons-related technology to China, but some military contractors also have civilian businesses in aerospace and other markets. President Xi Jinping's government has stepped up efforts to intimidate Taiwan by flying fighter jets and bombers near the island and firing missiles into the sea. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays, President's Day. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum.